Please welcome Mathilde Barge, Special Projects Analyst at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation.
We grew up in a world where forgetting our phone is often worse than forgetting our passports. As digital natives, we grew up with ChatGPT, with Siri, with personalized AI assistants. We grew up asking ChatGPT about career advice, about love advice. We ask Alexa to set calendar reminders. We grew up consumers of technology, but we often didn't feel empowered to shape it. Today, we're all together here at the Shared Future Summit because we believe AI is one of the most powerful levers we have to shape our future. Today, I'm going to be introducing to you two young, remarkable women making these futures possible. Please introduce to the stage Chiara Nirghin and Sneha Revenor. That's it. Chiara Nirghin is a South African entrepreneur turned technologist who at 16 in her local community in South Africa used orange peels, polymers to combat drought. She's now at Stanford building Shima, an agentic AI system, and making the world a better place.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sneha Revenor decided at 15 that she wanted to change the world. She created ENCODE, which is a youth movement, global youth movement, to fight racial bias algorithm in California justice system. She now has the biggest youth global movement system in DC and across the world, making sure youth voices have a voice to shape the technology conversation. Thank you so much for both of you for joining me here today. So I'm kind of curious. You both come from very, very different backgrounds, yet you all came to the same realization that AI can shape our future, can shape our communities. I'm curious about the moment of realization in both of your lives that actually made that possible. What was the turning points where you realized that you could actually become builders of technology, not only users of it? Maybe Sneha, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think there were actually two big awakening points for me in the story of founding ENCODE that I think really turned the tides. First was what you talked about. Back in 2020, I was in high school. I was sort of entering political consciousness, and I had come across this investigation conducted by ProPublica that uncovered racial bias in an algorithm used to predict recidivism. And I came across a ballot measure in my home state of California that was essentially trying to replace cash bail statewide with a very similar algorithmic system. And I was shocked because I think for a long time up until that point, obviously we grew up viewing technology as perfectly objective, scientific, and neutral, and I think that was sort of like a sledgehammer to that pre-existing notion that I'd had. I didn't really know how politics worked. I didn't know what it took to mount a campaign against a ballot measure, but I just tried anyway and learned as I was doing it, and ended up mobilizing a lot of my friends and people from not just California, but all across the country and world. We called voters, we hosted events, we created informational content, really trying to talk to voters about the impacts of AI on their daily lives, and specifically with this ballot measure, and actually ended up defeating that ballot measure by around a 13% margin come the election. And that was back in November of 2020, and I realized that honestly this issue of AI and its social, economic, political, and cultural impacts on our lives goes way beyond California, goes way beyond this issue of bias. It's a much larger issue. But I think that moment for me of actually being able to be politically impactful despite having no prior training or resources or funding showed me that I had an opportunity to play a much larger role in this conversation.
Chiara, do you want to tell us about you?
I think for me, I've always, ever since I was young, been so fascinated about building with algorithmic developments. I always knew that artificial intelligence was something that was a huge accelerator to making the world a better place. I call myself an AI maximalist right now. When I was younger and when I was growing up in South Africa, a lot of the problems we were seeing were coming through in very real world scenarios like climate change. And something that I was very passionate about was taking seminal research through multimodal data and applying it to climate change data that could actually have a very tangible impact in South Africa. And ever since I was young, I always knew that artificial intelligence and being able to apply even smaller models to very specific scenarios could have a fundamental impact. That right now is obviously extremely accelerated to sort of a pace unlike anything we've seen before. But what I've realized with artificial intelligence is that very small fine-tuning steps or RLHF steps can have a very big impact. Even sort of back in 2018, it was pretty evident to me, as even though I was in high school prior to college, that artificial intelligence was this huge thing that was coming to change the world.
I love this point about small impacts can make for bigger change, because we often believe as individuals that we don't have a voice in being agents of this future. So Sneha, as building one of the biggest youth global movements, actually in the US and in the world, combating racial bias and algorithm, but also now delving into other issues of deepfakes, a kind of global injustice about how we involve youth tech voices in this conversation. What's been maybe the biggest hurdles when you've been in those rooms with policymakers that you've heard, that you've seen, that you've experienced as a youth leader?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Mathilde, there's just been an incredible evolution in the work that ENCODE has done over time. We launched with a focus on that ballot measure in California, thinking about some of the immediate harms posed by AI, like bias. I think now we recognize that AI has the potential to upend our society in even more dramatic ways, right? We're talking about, could AI displace massive amounts of entry-level jobs? Could it be possible for AI to enable a terrorist to design a bioweapon? Or engineer a pandemic that could be even more lethal than COVID-19. Our elections are going to be destabilized by this, just deluge of deepfakes that, infect our political ecosystem. There's a range of scenarios here, but there's also obviously incredible opportunity to wield this technology as a force for good. And I think that in the time that I've built ENCODE, one of the most important projects we've worked on that I think really illustrates some of the battles we've fought was last year in California. We were actually sponsors of a very high-profile, very, very controversial bill in California that we thought was one of the most consequential pieces of AI legislation to date, called SB 1047, that would have just held AI companies accountable for doing basic testing to make sure that their most advanced models are safe before they release them to the public. And that was really like a clash of the titans. I mean, it brought out people from Elon Musk on one side to Nancy Pelosi on the other side. Labor unions like SAG-AFTRA were involved. You had teachers and parents and students. You had the LA Times editorial board. You had just weigh-in from OpenAI and Anthropic and all the leading AI labs. And I thought what was really, really interesting about that was, for the first time, I recognized that us as a youth-focused organization had the opportunity to be deeply, deeply involved on the front lines of this major policy battle. And I think that was a huge turning point for us. And I think ultimately that bill was vetoed, unfortunately, by Governor Newsom after passing the legislature, but we're still building on that work, fighting for more guardrails for a safer AI future, not only in states across the country, but also federally and internationally. And I think there's so much potential going forward for a real political movement around making AI work for all of us.
I love the point that you just made about redefining who you were in that conversation, but also redefining who gets to change. I think we often feel like we can't be technologists. And I feel like that question of starting from a local community and going global, scaling up that solution, is so important. I know, Chiara, that's so much of the work that you've been doing as a, of course, climate activist, but also in your work with Shima. I'm really curious about this question. You've been calling yourself a kitchen sink inventor, kind of going from very local solutions and growing that up. Maybe what's your vision for the future? How can we turn community power all across the world into a global movement for change?
I think that's a really interesting question, and one that I think is really empowered by artificial intelligence right now. It is very obvious to anybody building with some of the best models out there that pretty much by the end of this year, that the models are going to become so good that the amount of change that you're able to impact on very small problems is pretty much unprecedented. That being able to take sort of any 3 models from like any AI leaderboard and apply them to very specific scenarios will create huge amounts of change, whether that be customer service for an enterprise or climate change data applied through multiple different forums. I think what's very interesting is how that enables people from all across the world to be able to build and develop their own solutions to things that they have not yet been able to achieve. If you have Claude on your phone and you're talking to it like your best friend, you actually have one of the smartest friends in your pocket, which is like crazy, that or ChatGPT, and that right now is sort of a genie that's out of the box for every single person out in the world. And that is like truly so fundamental because everybody has access to some of the best engineers right now because right now they're coding pretty much 60 to 70% of AI startups code. Their code bases are all AI generated, which means that same leg up that every Silicon Valley sort of engineer has, everybody in the world has right now. So like the rate of change is like extremely unprecedented, and that creates this on a global scale, which for good or worse is coming very fast. So it's pretty exciting.
I think this massive opportunity that we have for change, that we have to get a very smart agent in our pockets. The question is, Sneha, what do you think is missing from that policy conversation to really empower all of that, to make that tool safe, ethical, easy to use, and powered with and by humans?
That's a great question. I think there's quite a bit missing from both the policy conversation and also just the general public conversation around AI. I think, to be honest, most people just like do not understand how good this technology is. I mean, it's incredibly impressive. It's incredibly capable. At the same time, I think a lot of people, their perceptions of AI are kind of still living in, where the technology was a couple of years ago when, it was still, making really silly mistakes and sort of stumbling over basic questions, and they don't recognize that this technology is moving exponentially. Right now, the models that are publicly available are, probably only a fraction as good as what's like internally available within the top companies. What that means is that the state of the art is incredibly advanced, and as a result, we're going to see unprecedented disruption to our daily lives, to our economic lives, to our social lives. I think the biggest thing that's missing from the policy conversation is just an actual deep, visceral understanding of like how capable the technology is, because I think a lot of people are kind of still living in the past and like over-indexing on limitations of the technology that will be, lifted pretty soon. I think also something that I think is really, really important is, in many ways, this technology is going to force us to reimagine the social contract almost altogether, right? What do you do in a world where, as I mentioned before, vast swaths of jobs are displaced by AI and people have to find new ways to find dignity and purpose and meaning and obviously, have a livelihood. What do you do in a world where, again, you maybe can't trust what you see online because who knows if a picture or a video or even a voice of someone that you hear talking is entirely AI generated, and you can have someone who's calling you. You can be a mom who has someone calling you claiming to be your daughter who's been abducted, but actually it's a voice clone from someone who's trying to defraud you. This happens, and I think that deep awareness of what this technology currently is, what it can do, is missing from the policy and public conversation right now.
And so, very short question and answer to both of you. What vision do you want to carry in the work that you're both leading to make this happen, to create a positive future for all of us? Maybe Karen, and we'll finish with Teha.
I think it's very clear that the path to superintelligence is one that is going to be crafted better with as many voices involved as possible. Doing that very fast with as much input is probably the safest, easiest, and most beneficial way to get there.
I think we have to resist, sort of letting fear and inertia tranquilize us. I think there's a lot of room for us to still steer this technology and make things better and like redesign a future that works for all of us. So as Kiara mentioned, I think having pluralistic leadership around this is going to be really, really essential.
Thank you to both of you. So today and in this conversation, we've heard from creators, entrepreneurs, community activists who believe that better is possible. We're here at the Shared Future Summit. We felt joy, hope, imagination for what's to come. We know that the future is ours to build. So today I want to leave all of you with a question. What are you going to do to make sure we succeed? Thank you so much.